The canine officer wouldn't stop barking at a pregnant woman in the crowded shopping center, causing confusion and embarrassment. Everyone dismissed it. Security even asked them to leave. But hours later, physicians made a chilling discovery. If the dog hadn't intervened, neither mother nor child would have survived. This is what truly happened. The fluorescent lights of Ridgemont's downtown precinct hummed overhead as Officer Alexandra Vega clipped the specialized K9 vest onto Atlas, her Belgian Malinois partner of 3 years. Outside, the October rain painted the city streets in glistening reflections, the kind of steady downpour that locals barely acknowledge. But tourists scrambled to escape. Alexandra adjusted her uniform collar, checked her equipment one final time, and glanced at the wall clock, 7:15 a.m. 15 minutes before their patrol shift officially began. "Ready for another day, keeping the streets safe, partner?" she asked, scratching behind Atlas's alert ears. The dog's intelligent amber eyes tracked her movements with the focused intensity that had made him legendary within the department. His muscular frame stood perfectly still as she secured the specialized K9 unit patches that identified him as law enforcement rather than a service animal. The precinct buzzed with the controlled chaos of shift-change night officers filing reports before heading home, day shift collecting assignments and coffee in equal measure. The familiar scent of burnt coffee mingled with the leather and metal polish that permeated the building, creating the distinct olfactory signature of a police station that Atlas had learned to associate with the beginning of their workday. Sergeant Harrison paused as he passed, nodding respectfully toward Atlas. "Got something interesting for you two today, Vega?" he said, handing over a tablet with their patrol assignments. "Northridge Mall called in about some shoplifting issues. Normally, we'd send a regular patrol unit, but there's been a series of organized retail thefts in that area. Management requested our best team." Alexandra suppressed a smile at the indirect compliment. 7 years with the K90 unit had earned her a reputation for thoroughness, but it was Atlas who had truly distinguished their partnership with his exceptional abilities. Their security cameras caught a pattern. Harrison continued scrolling through images on the tablet. Same group of suspects hitting electronics stores, grabbing display models and walking out before security can respond. They've hit 3 locations in the last month. Alexandra studied the grainy surveillance images, noting the practiced efficiency of the thieves. "They look organized, in and out in under 90 seconds. Exactly Loss Prevention thinks they might be part of that ring operating across 3 counties. The mall's got a tip they might be back today." What had begun as standard patrol and apprehension training for Atlas had evolved when trainers discovered his extraordinary olfactory precision, particularly his ability to detect blood in quantities so minute they sometimes eluded laboratory testing. This talent had initially been channeled toward tracking wounded suspects and locating victims in disaster scenarios. 2 years ago, they'd been part of the response team after the Westbridge collapse, where Atlas had located 3 victims trapped beneath debris that thermal imaging had missed. His uncanny precision had led to specialized training with the Medical Detection Research Program at Northern Pacific University, where researchers were still trying to understand the full extent of his capabilities. "Another day, another dollar," Alexandra murmured, clipping Atlas's lead to her belt. As they headed toward the parking garage, the specialized K9 unit SUV waited in its reserve spot equipment, already checked and loaded during last night's end-of-shift protocol. As they drove through Ridgemont's rain-soaked streets, Atlas sat attentively in his custom compartment, occasionally focusing on passing pedestrians before returning his gaze forward. Morning traffic moved with reluctant efficiency, commuters navigating between puddles and construction diversions as the wipers kept rhythmic time against the windshield. Their radio crackled with the morning's first call. Unit K94 respond to Northridge Mall south entrance near Mason's department store. Security has detained a shoplifting suspect requesting police presence for a formal arrest and possible connection to the organized retail theft ring. Kriya K94 responding. Alexandra confirmed, flicking on her lights to navigate more quickly through the congested streets. ETA approximately 8 minutes. Atlas's ears perked forward at the change in her voice, a subtle shift to the professional tone that always signaled they were on duty. As they approached the sprawling retail complex, neither could have anticipated how this routine call would test their partnership in ways no training had prepared them for. The south entrance of Northridge Mall bustled with unusual morning activity for a Wednesday. A local school holiday had brought families out in force, filling the walkways with strollers and teenagers. Despite the persistent rain, Alexandra guided Atlas through the automatic doors, his training immediately evident as he navigated the crowded space with perfect heel position, ignoring the occasional gasp or pointed finger from children who spotted the police dog. The air inside carried the peculiar blend of commercial spaces perfume from the cosmetics counters, the artificial butter smell from the pretzel stand near the entrance, and the faint antiseptic cleaners used on the polished tile floors. Alexandra noted Atlas taking in these scents with professional interest, cataloging the environment as they moved through the space. Security Director Jensen met them just inside his crisp uniform and professional demeanor, contrasting with the clearly agitated young man in handcuffs seated on a bench nearby. A small pile of merchandise with security tags still attached lay gathered as evidence. "Officer Vega, thanks for coming," Jensen said, extending his hand. "Caught this one trying to walk out with about $800 worth of electronics. Store manager wants to press charges, and we've had 3 similar incidents this month alone." Alexandra nodded, already scanning the environment as she maintained a loose but controlled grip on Atlas's lead. "We'll take his information and transport him back to the precinct for processing. Any witnesses we should speak with?" Jensen gestured toward a small gathering of people waiting near the security office. A store employee, an elderly gentleman with a cane, and a visibly pregnant woman in a Navy maternity dress who appeared to be around 7 months along. The lady in the Navy dress saw Catherine Winters actually spotted him removing security tags in the electronics department. "She's the one who alerted our team, Rai." Alexandra approached the witnesses, Atlas moving smoothly beside her. The routine of collecting statements had become second nature over her years on the force. Establish rapport, gather information, chronologically clarifying consistencies, thank them for their civic responsibility. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Officer Vega. I understand you witnessed the shoplifting incident. I'd like to take your statement if you..." Atlas's behavior changed so suddenly that Alexandra almost lost her grip on the lead. The Belgian Malinois had gone rigid nose, working overtime, his attention completely fixed on Catherine Winters. Before Alexandra could issue a correction command, Atlas let out 3 sharp barks. Not his standard alert bark used during training, but something more urgent, more insistent. "Atlas, quiet." Alexandra commanded, firmly, embarrassment flushing her cheeks as heads turned throughout the mall entrance. The dog ignored her completely, something he had never done in their 3 years together. He strained toward the pregnant woman, continuing to bark with increasing intensity. Catherine Winters instinctively backed away, one hand moving protectively to her swollen belly. "What's wrong with him? Is he dangerous?" Fear edged her voice as she retreated another step. "I'm so sorry." Alexandra apologized, using her body to create space between Atlas and the frightened woman. "He's extremely well trained. This behavior is completely out of character." Security Director Jensen stepped forward, his expression transitioning from professional to concerned. "Officer Vega, perhaps you should remove your dog from the premises. We have other witnesses who can provide statements." Atlas continued to strain toward Catherine, whining now between barks, his entire body communicating in urgency that Alexandra couldn't understand. A small crowd had gathered, phones raised to record the scene. The last thing the department needed was a viral video of a police dog apparently threatening a pregnant woman. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Alexandra asked Catherine, still struggling to maintain control of Atlas. "Has he frightened you?" Catherine's hand remained protectively over her belly. "I'm fine, just startled. Maybe he's reacting to something else." The baby kicked right when he started barking. "Atlas, heel." Alexandra commanded, with more authority, finally managing to pull him back a few steps, though his attention remained fixed on Catherine's midsection. His behavior was triggering alarm bells in Alexandra's mind. This wasn't aggression or poor training. This was Atlas trying desperately to communicate something specific. Mrs. Winters, this might sound strange, but are you experiencing any medical issues with your pregnancy? Any pain or discomfort at all? Catherine looked startled by the question. Just the usual backache and some pressure? Nothing unusual for 7 months. Why would you ask that? Jensen's patience was clearly wearing thin. Officer, we have a retail theft suspect in custody and witnesses waiting. If your K-9 can't maintain proper behavior, we should continue this process without him. Sorananamanamam. Alexandra nodded reluctantly, torn between her professional responsibilities and the nagging feeling that Atlas's behavior warranted attention. In the 3 years they'd worked together, he had never been wrong when alerting this intensely. I understand, Mrs. Winters. I apologize for the disturbance. If you're comfortable continuing, I'd like to take your statement quickly so you can be on your way. As Catherine began recounting what she'd witnessed in the electronics department, Atlas finally sat at Alexandra's command, but his eyes never left the pregnant woman, his muscles trembling with the effort of restraining himself from whatever his instincts were telling him to do. Again, I sincerely apologize for Atlas's behavior, Alexandra said as she finished taking Catherine's statement, her voice professional despite the embarrassment still coloring her cheeks. The pregnant woman had provided detailed information about the shoplifter's actions, but throughout the entire conversation, Atlas had remained fixated on her whining softly, despite Alexandra's quiet corrections. It's really fine, Catherine insisted, though she kept a cautious distance from the Belgian Malinois. Animals sometimes act strangely around pregnant women. My sister's cat wouldn't leave her alone during her 3rd trimester. Security Director Jensen had moved from concern to openly displeased, checking his watch repeatedly. Officer Vega, we need to process the suspect and reopen this entrance for normal business operations. The incident is creating a significant disruption. Of course, Alexandra acknowledged but hesitated before putting away her notebook. Mrs. Winters, would you mind if the mall's first aid responder checked your vitals before you leave? It's just a precaution, but Atlas is specifically trained in medical detection, and his behavior suggests he's alerting to something. Catherine's husband had joined her now, a tall man in a charcoal business suit who introduced himself as Jacob Winters. Is that really necessary? We're already running late for her prenatal appointment this afternoon. Here, go on. It would only take a minute. Alexandra pressed gently. Atlas has a documented history of detecting medical issues before they become apparent to humans. Jacob's expression softened slightly at the concern in Alexandra's voice. I suppose it couldn't hurt. Catherine's been having more backaches than usual today. The mall's first aid responder, a former EMT named Torres, arrived promptly with a medical kit. His cursory examination revealed nothing immediately concerning. Catherine's blood pressure was slightly elevated, but within normal range for pregnancy. Her pulse regular, and she reported no unusual symptoms beyond typical 3rd trimester discomfort. Everything seems normal. Torres concluded, packing away his stethoscope. Blood pressure is a bit high, but that's common when you've been standing around giving police statements. I'd recommend resting before your doctor's appointment this afternoon. Jacob helped Catherine to her feet, his arms supportive around her waist. There, you see nothing to worry about him? Your dog probably just smelled something else. Alexandra nodded, though doubt lingered as she observed Atlas's continued alertness. Thank you for your patience. Please don't hesitate to seek medical attention if anything changes before your appointment. As the Winters walked away toward the mall's north parking structure, Atlas strained against his lead, letting out another whine that made Alexandra's stomach tighten with uncertainty. Officer Vega, Jensen's voice cut through her thoughts. We need to complete the processing of our suspect, and frankly, I'll need to file an incident report about your K-9's behavior. Mall management takes any potential safety concerns very seriously. I understand, Alexandra replied, professionalism masking her frustration. Atlas has never behaved this way before. He's certified in multiple detection specialties with a perfect training record. Nevertheless, his behavior created a disturbance and frightened a pregnant woman. That's not something we can overlook. Alexandra completed the necessary paperwork for the shoplifting suspect, arranging for a patrol unit to transport him to the precinct for booking. Throughout the process, Atlas remained unusually tense, his attention repeatedly shifting toward the direction the Winters had departed even after they were long out of sight. As they finally returned to their vehicle, Alexandra found herself questioning her partnership for the first time. Had she misread Atlas's behavior? Was there something she had missed in their training that could explain this embarrassing incident? The impending incident report would require a formal response and possibly a review of Atlas's certification, a bureaucratic nightmare that could impact their position in the K-9 unit. "What were you trying to tell me, boy?" she asked quietly as they pulled away from the mall. Atlas's gaze still fixed on the building behind them. In their years together, she had learned to trust his instincts implicitly. His nose had found victims when technology failed and detected evidence that human investigators missed. But today, his behavior had seemed random, unprofessional, potentially damaging to their reputation. And yet, as they drove back toward the precinct, Alexandra couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Atlas had been trying desperately to communicate something important. Something that everyone, herself included, had dismissed too quickly. The autumn rain intensified as Alexandra pulled their vehicle into the precinct's designated K-9 unit parking space. Her mind drifted back to the first time she'd met Atlas 3 years earlier at the regional training facility in Eastern Washington. She had been recovering from a shoulder injury sustained during a pursuit, an incident that had left her questioning her future in patrol work. The K-9 division had seemed like the perfect lateral move, combining her law enforcement experience with her lifelong affinity for working dogs. Atlas had been sitting perfectly still in his kennel, while other dogs barked and jumped excitedly as potential handlers walked through. Something in his intense, focused gaze had connected with her, immediately an intelligence that seemed to assess her as thoroughly as she was evaluating him. "That one's had 3 handlers already," the kennel master had told her. "Too intense," they said, "too focused on blood tracking to the exclusion of other training. Great nose, but they couldn't channel it properly." She'd knelt before his kennel, and Atlas had approached the gate with dignified curiosity rather than the frenetic energy of the other candidates. "He's not washing out," she'd said with certainty. "He's just waiting for someone who understands him." Their first 6 months together had been challenging Atlas's extraordinary olfactory abilities, sometimes overwhelming his other training objectives. While most police dogs were taught to detect multiple scents, like narcotics or explosives, Atlas had demonstrated an almost supernatural precision when it came to detecting blood. He could identify minute traces that sometimes eluded crime scene technicians, pinpointing their exact location with unnerving accuracy. This unique talent had transformed their partnership during a routine missing persons case, their first year together. A 6-year-old girl had disappeared during a family hiking trip in the Cascade foothills. Standard search patterns had yielded nothing, and after 36 hours, hope was fading. Alexandra had given Atlas one of the girl's t-shirts, expecting him to track the general scent trail. Instead, Atlas had detected microscopic blood traces from a small scrape the child had sustained before going missing, blood so minimal the parents hadn't even realized their daughter was injured. Following this nearly invisible trail, Atlas had led rescuers to an abandoned mining shaft where the girl had fallen and become trapped. Medical personnel had later confirmed that without Atlas's extraordinary detection abilities, they would never have found the child in time. Their most significant case had come during the Westbridge collapse, amid the chaos of broken concrete and twisted rebar. Atlas had systematically located survivors by detecting blood through layers of debris. In one remarkable instance, he had insisted on a particular section of collapsed roadway, despite thermal imaging showing no heat signatures. Rescue workers had discovered a young woman in a hypothermic state. Her core temperature so low the sensors hadn't detected her, but Atlas had detected the microscopic blood from her internal injuries through 20 feet of concrete. After that incident, researchers from Northern Pacific University's medical detection program had approached the department about studying Atlas's abilities. The controlled tests had confirmed what Alexandra already knew. Atlas could detect blood in concentrations as low as a few parts per billion, and more remarkably could distinguish between different types of bleeding, seemingly able to prioritize based on the severity or source of the blood. Dr. Priya Sharma, the program's lead researcher, had been particularly fascinated by Atlas's apparent ability to detect internal bleeding that showed no external symptoms. "He's not just smelling the blood," she had explained to Alexandra during one testing session. "He's detecting the specific biomarkers released when particular types of tissues are damaged. It's like he has a portable medical laboratory in his nose." This training had become part of their regular certification, with Atlas's abilities documented in peer-reviewed research articles and specialized law enforcement journals. His detection skills had located gunshot victims hiding in buildings, identified internal injuries in car accident victims who showed no visible trauma, and even alerted to a brain aneurysm in a colleague during a routine training exercise. And yet today, these extraordinary abilities had been dismissed by everyone, including herself, when Atlas had focused on Catherine Winters. Sitting in the parking lot now, rain drumming on the roof of their vehicle, Alexandra made a decision. Atlas had never been wrong when alerting with that level of intensity. Not once in 3 years. She pulled out her phone and searched for Catherine Winters Ridgemont. A social media profile appeared immediately, the same woman from the mall, her profile picture showing her smiling alongside her husband, her pregnancy less advanced in the photo. Listed under employment was Winters Legal Consultants. Alexandra hesitated only briefly before typing the address into her GPS. Atlas had trusted her judgment countless times over their partnership. Perhaps it was time she returned that trust completely, even if it meant risking official reprimand. The Lakeview Heights apartments stood in stark contrast to the surrounding neighborhood, a sleek modern high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the cloudy afternoon sky. Alexandra had changed into civilian clothes, leaving her badge secured but accessible in her jacket pocket. Atlas sat in the passenger seat, his working vest removed but his specialized training collar still in place. "This is probably nothing," Alexandra told him as they sat parked across from the building entrance. "And if I'm wrong, this little unauthorized follow-up could cost us both our careers." Atlas's steady gaze seemed to communicate complete certainty, his body tense with the same alertness he displayed at the mall. When Catherine Winters's silver SUV pulled into the building's underground parking entrance, his reaction was immediate, a low whine and forward shift that Alexandra had learned to interpret as absolute conviction. "Okay, partner," she sighed, starting her engine. "But we're doing this carefully." The building's concierge stopped them at the lobby entrance, eyeing Atlas with professional concern. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but pets aren't allowed in the common areas without prior arrangement." Alexandra produced her badge, keeping her tone conversational rather than authoritative. "I'm Officer Vega, Ridgemont PD. I'm following up on an incident report involving one of your residents, Catherine Winters. It would only take a few minutes." The concierge hesitated, then made a quick call that apparently satisfied any concerns. 18th floor apartment, 1802. "I'll let Mr. Winters know you're coming up." The elevator ride gave Alexandra time to question her decision yet again. She had no official reason to be here, no case number to justify the follow-up. If the Winters complained about harassment, she would have no departmental protection. But Atlas's continued alertness, the trademark intensity that had saved lives before, strengthened her resolve. Jacob Winters answered the door, his earlier business suit replaced by casual wear, his expression transitioning from polite curiosity to recognition and then wariness. "Officer Vega, is there a problem with Catherine's statement?" "No, nothing like that," Alexandra assured him. "I wanted to follow up personally about what happened this morning. My K9 partner's behavior was highly unusual, and in my experience that warrants a second check." She gestured to Atlas, who stood alertly beside her. "I promise he's completely safe and exceptionally well-trained." Jacob's posture remained guarded, but he stepped aside. "Catherine's resting. She's been having more discomfort this afternoon, but the doctor says that's normal at 30 weeks. The apartment was spacious and tastefully furnished with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of Lake Washington. Catherine reclined on a sectional sofa, looking more tired than she had that morning, a throw blanket covering her legs despite the apartment's warm temperature. Officer Vega. Catherine's surprise was evident as she struggled to sit up straighter. Is something wrong with my witness statement? Atlas's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His body tensed, nose working rapidly as he fixated on Catherine with the same intensity he'd shown at the mall, but now with even greater urgency. I apologize for the unorthodox visit. Alexandra began maintaining firm control of Atlas's lead. But I wanted to check on you. Atlas is specifically trained in medical detection, and his behavior this morning suggested he detected something concerning. Catherine's hand moved protectively to her belly. The mall first aid person said everything was fine, and it probably is. Alexandra acknowledged. But Atlas has a documented history of detecting medical issues before conventional symptoms appear. He's participated in medical research studies at Northern Pacific University and has a perfect record of detection accuracy. Jacob moved closer to his wife, protective skepticism evident in his stance. You're suggesting your dog knows something about my wife's medical condition that her obstetrician doesn't. Alexandra chose her next words carefully. Atlas has specialized training in detecting blood. Specifically, he can identify internal bleeding before external symptoms appear. He's located disaster victims beneath rubble by detecting microscopic blood traces through 20 feet of concrete. In Inanne, Catherine shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, wincing slightly. I've just been having some back pain and pressure. The doctor said it's normal, especially since I've been on my feet more than usual today. Atlas suddenly pulled forward with such determination that Alexandra had to brace herself. Instead of barking, he whined urgently, the sound he used during search and rescue operations when he'd located a critically injured victim. When is your doctor's appointment? Alexandra asked, her concern growing as she observed Catherine's pallor and the slight tremble in her hands. Not until 4, Jacob answered, checking his watch. About an hour from now. Alexandra made a decision that could end her career if she was wrong. Mr. Winters, I strongly recommend you take your wife to the hospital now. Not in an hour, right now. Based on your dog's behavior, Jacob's incredulity was unmistakable. That seems... Jacob, it hurts. Catherine's voice had changed, fear edging into her tone as she pressed both hands against her abdomen. It's getting worse, not better, and I feel dizzy when I stand up. Those can be symptoms of placental abruption, Alexandra said quietly. Her years of emergency response training surfacing internal bleeding that conventional examinations sometimes miss in early stages. Catherine's face paled further. My mother had that with my brother. The doctor mentioned I have some risk factors. Jacob's skepticism dissolved instantly at the fear in his wife's voice. I'll get the car. Oh, I think we should call an ambulance. Alexandra countered, already pulling out her phone. If Atlas is correct about what he's detecting, every minute could matter. As she dialed 911 requesting emergency medical response for a possible obstetric emergency, Alexandra watched Atlas maintain his focused vigilance on Catherine. The look in his amber eyes was one she recognized from their most critical search operations, the absolute certainty that had led rescuers to survivors everyone else had given up for dead. The wail of the approaching ambulance cut through the ambient noise of the upscale neighborhood. Jacob knelt beside Catherine, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by visible fear as he held her hand. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly in the 12 minutes since Alexandra had placed the call. Her skin now clammy, her breathing shallow. The ambulance is almost here. Alexandra reassured them, having cleared space for the paramedics to access the apartment. Atlas remained in perfect position beside her, his alertness unwavering, but his behavior now controlled and professional. The paramedics arrived with practiced efficiency, 2 seasoned emergency responders who wasted no time with introductions as they began their assessment. They worked with a synchronized precision that came from years of partnership, one establishing IV access, while the other monitored vital signs and asked focused questions about the pregnancy 30 weeks pregnant, increased pain and pressure today. Dizziness upon standing, the lead paramedic recited as he worked. Any vaginal bleeding? No. Catherine answered, her voice weak. Just the pain and feeling faint. It's been getting worse all day. Alexandra stepped forward. My canine partner is specifically trained in blood detection. His behavior suggests possible internal bleeding, potentially a placental abruption. The paramedic glanced at Atlas, then back to Alexandra, recognition dawning. You're Vega and Atlas from the Westbridge collapse, the team that found the hypothermic victim? Yes. Alexandra confirmed, relief washing through her that she wouldn't need to justify the unusual medical alert. The paramedic nodded, immediately adjusting his approach. Possible concealed abruption. Let's move now. Wide open IV and alert obstetrical trauma at Lakeview Memorial. To Jacob, he added, we're taking your wife to Lakeview instead of Ridgemont General. They have the best high-risk obstetrics team in the region. They transferred Catherine to the stretcher with careful urgency, her condition visibly worsening as her body fought to compensate for the blood loss that only Atlas could detect. The paramedics allowed Jacob to ride in the ambulance. But before closing the doors, the lead paramedic turned to Alexandra. You coming? If your K9 detected something our equipment isn't showing yet, the doctors will want to know exactly how he alerted. Alexandra nodded, following them in her vehicle with Atlas in his secured compartment. The ambulance moved through traffic with controlled speed lights and sirens parting the congested streets as it headed toward the Waterfront Hospital complex. Halfway there, Alexandra's police radio crackled with an emergency update from the ambulance. Patient becoming unresponsive, BP dropping, possible obstetric hemorrhage in progress. ETA Lakeview Memorial 4 minutes. Shir Ekadib Katwashinaan. Alexandra's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she maintained position behind the ambulance. Though Atlas couldn't understand the radio transmission, he sensed the change in her posture, whining softly from his compartment. Good boy, she told him. You were right. You knew when nobody else did. Lakeview Memorial's emergency entrance was already prepared when they arrived. A trauma team, waiting with equipment for both Catherine and the baby Alexandra, watched as they transferred Catherine from the ambulance. The medical team moving with the controlled urgency that marked critical situations. A tall woman in surgical scrubs approached as Catherine was wheeled inside, directing questions to the paramedics before turning to Alexandra. I'm Dr. Maya Chen, obstetrical trauma. They tell me your K9 detected this before conventional symptoms appeared. Yes, Alexandra confirmed. Atlas is specialized in blood detection. He alerted strongly to Mrs. Winters at approximately 9:30 this morning. Then with increased urgency when we checked on her at her apartment around 2:45 p.m. Dr. Chen's expression was thoughtful rather than dismissive. The initial ultrasound isn't showing an obvious abruption, but her falling blood pressure and other symptoms suggest concealed hemorrhage. Can your dog's behavior help us localize where the bleeding might be occurring? He can, Alexandra confirmed, surprised but grateful for the doctor's openness. He's trained to indicate the strongest source of the scent, then bring him in. The doctor decided we're preparing for emergency surgery, but if your dog can give us any additional information about the location of the bleeding, it could save critical time. Alexandra led Atlas through the emergency department, ignoring the startled looks from staff as they entered the trauma bay, where Catherine was now surrounded by medical equipment. The monitoring devices showed her heart rate elevated, her blood pressure dangerously low despite the fluids being pushed through 2 IVs. Catherine, we're going to perform an emergency cesarean. Dr. Chen was explaining. The baby is showing signs of distress and your condition is deteriorating. We need to move quickly. Atlas moved with perfect discipline as Alexandra guided him closer to the bed. His nose worked methodically, tracking across Catherine's body before he sat abruptly and placed his paw gently but firmly on the upper right quadrant of her abdomen. The trained indication that marked the strongest source of the scent he was tracking. Upper right quadrant. Dr. Chen noted, possible right-sided placental abruption with retroplacental bleeding. Let's get her to OR3 now. Prepare for possible DIC protocol and have neonatal team on standby for premature delivery. As they wheeled Catherine toward the operating room, she reached out weakly toward Alexandra and Atlas. Thank you, she whispered. If you hadn't come to check on me, Jacob stood frozen for a moment as his wife was rushed away, medical terminology flying around him too quickly to process. Then he turned to Alexandra, his face ashen. The doctor said if we'd waited until our scheduled appointment, it would have been... He couldn't finish the sentence. Your wife is in good hands. Alexandra assured him, though the gravity of the situation was evident in the organized chaos around them. Lakeview Memorial has an excellent trauma team. A nurse approached to guide Jacob to the surgical waiting area, explaining that the procedure would likely take at least an hour. Before following, he knelt briefly next to Atlas. I didn't believe, he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. But you knew. How did you know when nobody else could tell? Alexandra wished she had a simpler explanation than the complex combination of genetics training and the inexplicable bond between Handler and K9 that had saved lives before. He's special, she said instead, and he's never wrong when he alerts like that. The surgical waiting room maintained the peculiar vacuum of emotion common to all hospitals, a space where time seemed suspended between hope and fear. Jacob Winters paced the length of the room, occasionally stopping to stare out the rain-streaked windows at the harbor below, then resuming his measured steps. Alexandra sat quietly in the corner, Atlas resting at her feet, but still alert, his training allowing him to remain calm in the medical environment, despite the stress signals he undoubtedly sensed from the humans around him. You don't have to stay, Jacob said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly 30 minutes. You've already gone far beyond your official duties. I'd like to see this through, Alexandra replied. Unless you prefer privacy. Jacob shook his head, returning to the molded plastic chair beside her. No, you and Atlas are the reason we're here in time. They're not just empty words when I say Catherine, and the baby would... He swallowed hard, unable to complete the thought. The surgical liaison nurse had updated them once 20 minutes into the procedure. With the measured optimism that medical professionals cultivate, Catherine was stable. The surgery progressing, more information would come when available. The carefully neutral phrasing had done little to ease the tension etched across Jacob's features. Can I ask, he ventured after another stretch of silence, how did Atlas know the doctors ran tests this morning at her regular checkup and found nothing concerning? Alexandra considered how to explain something that medical researchers were still studying. Atlas's sense of smell is approximately 40 times more powerful than ours, but it's more than just sensitivity. He's been specially trained to detect blood in the quantities too small for conventional testing. More importantly, he can differentiate between normal blood presence and abnormal bleeding patterns. But there was no visible blood, Jacob countered. Even now, the doctor said it's a concealed abruption. The blood doesn't need to be visible to him. The body releases specific biomarkers when internal bleeding occurs. Microscopic changes in blood chemistry that escape through skin breath. Even clothing Atlas can detect these changes before conventional symptoms appear. Their conversation was interrupted as the door opened, revealing Dr. Chen, still dressed in surgical scrubs. Her expression professionally composed, but with the subtle relief that signaled positive news. Mr. Winters, she began, taking the seat across from them. Your wife is stable now. We performed an emergency cesarean delivery and are treating the placental abruption that was causing significant internal bleeding. And the baby? Jacob asked the question, barely audible. Your daughter's in neonatal intensive care. She's premature at 30 weeks, but she's breathing on her own with supplemental oxygen. Her vital signs are strong, which is remarkable considering the circumstances. The tension visibly drained from Jacob's body, though concern still lined his face. Can I see them? Catherine is in recovery now. You can see her briefly in about 20 minutes. The baby will remain in the NICU, but you can visit her as well once Catherine is settled. Dr. Chen turned her attention to Alexandra and Atlas. Officer Vega, I'd like to thank you and your partner for your intervention. The surgical team confirmed a concealed placental abruption exactly where your dog indicated. How serious was it? Alexandra asked quietly. The doctor's professional demeanor softened slightly. In my 15 years of obstetrical medicine, I've rarely seen a concealed abruption progress so significantly without external symptoms. By the time Mrs. Winters reached her scheduled appointment, both she and the baby would have been in critical condition, possibly beyond our ability to save. Jacob covered his face with his hands. The reality of how close they'd come to tragedy finally hitting him fully. What's remarkable, Dr. Chen continued, is that your K9 partner detected this condition at the mall this morning before Mrs. Winters experienced even minor symptoms. The pathology report suggests the abruption had just begun developing at that point. Microscopic bleeding that wouldn't have been detected by any conventional screening. That's consistent with his training. Alexandra explained Atlas has detected blood traces that were several hours old and in quantities too small for crime scene technicians to identify without specific chemical testing. Will his ability save 2 lives today? Dr. Chen stood checking her pager. The obstetrics department would be very interested in learning more about your K9 program. We're constantly seeking better methods for early detection of pregnancy complications. After the doctor departed, Jacob remained silent for several minutes, processing everything. Finally, he turned to Alexandra. I dismissed him completely this morning. I thought it was just an untrained animal making a scene. Most people would have reacted the same way. Alexandra assured him, "That's why I came to your apartment. Despite having no official reason to follow up, I've learned to trust Atlas's alerts, even when they seem improbable." How did this happen without anyone noticing? Jacob asked the question directed more to himself than to Alexandra. Catherine had a checkup just last week. Everything was normal. Dr. Chen mentioned it was concealed. The bleeding was occurring behind the placenta rather than externally. Those cases are particularly dangerous because they often don't show symptoms until they become critical. The liaison nurse returned, informing them that Catherine had been moved to recovery and Jacob could visit briefly. He rose, then hesitated. "Would you and Atlas come too, just for a moment? I think Catherine would want to thank you both properly." The recovery room was dimly lit and quiet. Apart from the steady beeping of monitoring equipment, Catherine lay propped slightly upright, her skin still pale, but no longer showing the gray undertone of critical blood loss. Her eyes brightened when she saw Jacob, then widened in surprise at the sight of Alexandra and Atlas entering behind him. "You stayed," she said weakly, extending her hand. "Thank you. Doesn't seem adequate?" Alexandra approached the bedside Atlas, maintaining perfect heel position. "I'm just glad we followed up. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Catherine admitted with a weak smile. "But they say both I and Olivia are going to be okay." "Olivia?" Alexandra asked. Jacob nodded. "Olivia Alexandra Winters. We decided on the middle name just now." His voice broke slightly as he added, "It seemed appropriate to name her partly after the officer who saved her life." Alexandra felt unexpected emotion tightening her throat. That's an honor, but Atlas deserves the credit. He's the one who knew something was wrong." Catherine's gaze shifted to the Belgian Malinois sitting attentively beside Alexandra. The doctor explained what happened, that I had a concealed placental abruption that wouldn't have shown symptoms until it was too late. She said your dog detected it hours before any medical equipment could have. His nose can detect blood in concentrations as low as a few parts per billion. Alexandra explained, "The research team at Northern Pacific University is still trying to understand exactly how he distinguishes between normal blood presence and abnormal bleeding patterns. Well, whatever he sensed." Catherine said, "He knew before anyone else that something was seriously wrong. The doctor said by the time we reached my scheduled appointment." She trailed off, her hand tightening around Jacob's. "Let's focus on the positive outcome," the nurse interjected gently. "Your daughter is doing remarkably well for 30 weeks. You'll be able to see her in the NICU once you have rested a bit more." As they prepared to leave, giving Catherine the rest she needed, Atlas did something unexpected. He moved slightly forward, his nose gently touching Catherine's hand where it rested on the blanket. The gesture lasted only a moment before he returned to perfect position beside Alexandra, but it left Catherine with tears in her eyes. "It's almost like he knows," she whispered. Alexandra nodded, her own throat tight with emotion. "I think he does." The neonatal intensive care unit operated with its own rhythm, distinct from the controlled chaos of the emergency department below. Soft voices and gentle movements created an atmosphere of careful precision as medical staff tended to the unit's tiny patients. 3 days after the emergency surgery, Alexandra stood outside the glass-walled room, observing as Catherine sat beside the incubator containing her daughter, Olivia. Alexandra Winters, born 8 weeks premature and weighing just over 3 pounds, had defied initial medical expectations. Though still requiring supplemental oxygen and feeding assistance, she had shown remarkable resilience, something the neonatal specialists attributed to the rapid intervention that had prevented prolonged oxygen deprivation. "She has your fighting spirit," Alexandra heard Jacob tell his wife as the sliding door opened to admit another visitor. Dr. Chen approached with clipboard in hand, her professional demeanor softened by genuine warmth as she greeted the new parents. Alexandra prepared to leave, not wanting to intrude on their private medical discussion. Before she could step away, Jacob spotted her through the glass and waved her in his expression, conveying that her presence was welcome. "Officer Vega," Dr. Chen acknowledged as Alexandra entered. "I was just reviewing Olivia's progress with the Winters. She's exceeding our expectations for a 30-week delivery following placental abruption." Catherine looked up from the incubator, exhaustion evident beneath her smile. The transfusions and emergency surgery had taken their toll, but the medical team had assured her that with time she would recover completely. "We were just talking about bringing Atlas to meet her properly once she's a bit stronger." The NICU supervisor approved it as a special case. "He'd like that," Alexandra replied, touched by the gesture. "He's actually waiting in the K-9 unit vehicle department. Protocol doesn't allow him in medical facilities without specific authorization." Dr. Chen made a notation on her clipboard. "I've granted that authorization effective immediately. In fact, I've spoken with the hospital administrator about developing a pilot program with your K-9 unit for high-risk obstetric screenings. Your partner's abilities could potentially revolutionize how we detect early complications in pregnancy." The concept wasn't entirely unexpected. Atlas's extraordinary detection abilities had attracted medical interest before, but the practical application in obstetrics represented an exciting new frontier. Alexandra thought of the research possibilities of other pregnant women whose complications might be detected before becoming life-threatening emergencies. "I'd be happy to discuss it with my superiors," she offered. "The department has established protocols for specialty deployments in medical settings." Jacob stood beside his wife, one hand resting protectively on the incubator containing their daughter. When Dr. Chen explained exactly what happened with Catherine's condition, I could hardly believe it. The placenta had begun separating from the uterine wall that morning, exactly when Atlas first alerted at the mall. The bleeding was entirely internal. The doctor elaborated, her tone shifting to clinical precision. "No conventional screening would have detected it at that stage." By the time Catherine reached the hospital, she had lost nearly 20% of her blood volume into the concealed space behind the placenta. Had the condition progressed another 2 to 3 hours, the outcome would likely have been catastrophic. Catherine reached through the incubator's access port to gently touch her daughter's tiny hand. The NICU doctor said that babies born after placental abruption often have complications from oxygen deprivation, but Olivia's tests are all normal. Because we delivered her before the placental separation progressed to the point of compromising her oxygen supply. Dr. Chen explained, "In most cases like this, patients don't reach medical care until they're experiencing severe symptoms, by which point the fetus has often been in distress for hours." The gravity of what might have happened hung in the air for a moment before Jacob broke the silence. The hospital administration asked if we'd consider participating in a case study for their medical journal. They want to document how a police K-9 detected a life-threatening condition before medical technology could. "I think it's a wonderful idea," Alexandra replied. "Atlas's capabilities deserve to be better understood by the medical community. There may be other applications we haven't even considered." A soft chime from Dr. Chen's pager interrupted the conversation. After checking the message, she excused herself to attend to another patient, promising to return later to discuss Olivia's feeding progress. When she had gone, Catherine reached for Alexandra's hand. "I keep thinking about how differently this could have ended if you hadn't trusted Atlas enough to follow up. He's the one who deserves the credit." Alexandra said, "I almost didn't listen to him either. If not for our history together, all the times his detection abilities proved right, despite seeming improbable, I might have dismissed his behavior as an anomaly. Will you face any consequences for checking on us without official cause?" Jacob asked, concern evident in his voice. Alexandra smiled. "Quite the opposite, actually. Once the department understood the circumstances, they've been fully supportive. The potential for positive press and the medical research opportunities have turned what could have been a procedural issue into what my sergeant called a public relations goldmine." Through the glass wall of the NICU, she could see other tiny infants in their incubators, each surrounded by the technology designed to give them their best chance at survival. How many of their mothers might have benefited from earlier detection of complications? How many future cases might be caught sooner if Atlas's abilities could be systematically applied in medical screening? Would you and Atlas consider being Olivia's godparents? Catherine asked suddenly, the question catching Alexandra completely off guard. "I know it's unconventional, but then so is having your life saved by a police dog with a supernatural nose." The unexpected offer touched Alexandra deeply. In her years of police work, she had saved lives before, had made differences in countless cases. But this connection felt different, more personal, more profound. "We'd be honored," she answered, simply knowing that this case had changed not just the winner's lives, but her own perception of her partnership with Atlas. His extraordinary abilities had always impressed her, but now she understood that trusting those abilities could transcend professional protocols and procedures when something truly important was at stake. As she left the NICU to retrieve Atlas from the vehicle, Alexandra reflected on the bond that had led her to trust her partner's instincts despite all logical reasons to doubt. Some connections defied conventional explanation, whether between mother and child handler in K9, or the mysterious ability of a dog to sense what sophisticated medical technology couldn't detect until it was almost too late. The winter sun cast long shadows across Lakeview Memorial Center's main entrance, as Alexandra guided Atlas through the automatic doors. Though they had visited weekly during Catherine's extended recovery, today marked a special occasion. Olivia's official discharge after 31 days in neonatal intensive care. The Belgian Malinois moved with perfect discipline despite the excitement evident in his alert posture. He had adapted remarkably well to the hospital environment during their previous visits, maintaining his professional demeanor even as staff members stopped to admire him. Today he wore not his standard working vest, but a specialized therapy dog designation, temporarily granted for this particular visit. They found the Winters family in the NICU family room surrounded by balloons and a small gathering of medical staff who had cared for Olivia during her first month of life. The premature infant, who had once seemed impossibly tiny, now weighed almost 5 pounds, her improved condition evident in her alert gaze and stronger movements. Catherine sat in a wheelchair as required by hospital policy for discharge, though she had physically recovered from her surgery. When she spotted Alexandra and Atlas entering, her face brightened with genuine warmth. "The guests of honor," she announced, causing the assembled medical team to turn. "Everyone, this is Officer Alexandra Vega and K9 Officer Atlas, the team that saved both our lives." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Perfect timing. We were just about to have a small celebration before discharge. Olivia has exceeded every developmental benchmark we set for her. Could you worry?" Jacob approached carefully, cradling his daughter in his arms. The transformation in the man was remarkable, from the skeptic who had initially dismissed Atlas's behavior to someone who now knelt carefully to bring his daughter to eye level with the Belgian Malinois. "Olivia," he said softly, though the infant was far too young to understand. "This is Atlas. He's the reason you and your mom are both here today." Atlas remained perfectly still, his training allowing him to assess the tiny human without any threatening movements. After a moment of careful observation, he did something that brought tears to Alexandra's eyes. He gently lowered his head in a gesture of almost ceremonial gentleness, his nose carefully sniffing the baby's blanket before he resumed his perfect sitting position. He remembered, Catherine said quietly. Somehow he knows who she is. Dr. Sharma from Northern Pacific University's Medical Detection Program had joined them for this milestone. Over the past month, she had conducted several sessions studying Atlas's abilities, incorporating the findings from Olivia's case into her ongoing research. What's remarkable isn't just that he detected the abruption before conventional symptoms appeared, she explained to the gathered medical staff. It's that he differentiated it from normal pregnancy blood markers. His nose identified the specific biomarkers released when the placenta began separating, something our current screening tests can't do. One of the NICU nurses who had cared for Olivia since her first day shook her head in amazement. In 23 years of neonatal nursing, I've seen dozens of placental abruption cases. The outcomes are rarely this positive, especially with concealed abruptions, where diagnosis typically comes only after significant symptoms develop. That's why we're implementing the pilot program next month. Dr. Chen added, Officer Vega and Atlas will visit our high-risk pregnancy clinic twice weekly to screen patients. We're developing a research protocol to document and analyze his alerts. Catherine reached out to stroke Atlas's head, a gesture the disciplined K9 accepted with dignified patience. We've been told that many women with my condition don't reach the hospital in time, she said quietly, that without immediate intervention, both mother and baby often. She didn't need to complete the thought. Everyone in the room understood the gravity of what had nearly happened and what Atlas's extraordinary abilities had prevented. Jacob carefully returned Olivia to Catherine's arms, the baby now sleeping peacefully, unaware of her medical journey or the significance of this day. We wanted to give you something, he said to Alexandra, retrieving a small package from beside the wheelchair. It's not much compared to what you've given us, but we wanted you to have it. Inside the carefully wrapped box lay a framed photograph of Olivia in her incubator, her tiny hand wrapped around Catherine's finger. Beside it, a silver badge-shaped medallion had been engraved with the words K9 Hero Atlas and the date of Olivia's birth. The department already gave us official commendations last week, Alexandra said, deeply touched by the personal gesture. This isn't about official recognition, Catherine explained. This is from our family to yours because that's what you and Atlas have become to us. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Olivia securely fastened in her car seat with medical staff providing final instructions. Alexandra reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a routine shoplifting call had transformed not just the Winters' lives, but potentially the future of maternal-fetal medicine. The hospital administrator had approached her earlier that week about expanding the pilot program into a permanent screening initiative, one that could eventually be replicated in hospitals across the country. Atlas's abilities, once considered unusual, even within the specialized world of K9 units, might pioneer an entirely new approach to early detection of pregnancy complications. As they walked the family to their vehicle, Alexandra observed Atlas's continued alertness. Not the urgent vigilance of that first encounter, but the satisfied attention of a guardian whose charge was now safe. Some connections transcended explanation, whether formed through years of partnership or created in a single moment of crisis, when instinct overrode training. When they reached the parking area, Catherine turned to Alexandra one last time. The doctor told me yesterday that if we'd waited even 2 more hours, neither Olivia nor I would have survived. I'll never be able to thank you enough for listening to Atlas when everyone else dismissed him. Alexandra watched as Jacob secured the car seat, Olivia sleeping peacefully within it. That's what partnership means, she replied simply. Sometimes you have to trust even when you don't fully understand. The sentiment applied as much to her relationship with Atlas as it did to the extraordinary bond they'd formed with the Winters family. A reminder that sometimes the most important connections in life come from moments when we choose to follow instincts rather than logic, trust rather than doubt, and reach out rather than turn away. As Olivia grew and thrived in the months that followed, she became something of a living legend at Lakeview Memorial Hospital. Doctors would tell new residents about the remarkable canine officer who had detected a concealed placental abruption before any medical technology could have founded a story that emphasized both the limitations of modern medicine and the extraordinary potential of trained animal instincts. For Alexandra and Atlas, life returned to a normal routine of patrols and specialized deployments, though they now spent 2 mornings each week at the high-risk pregnancy clinic, where Atlas's unique abilities were being documented and studied. Already his alerts had identified 3 cases of early placental complications that conventional testing had missed, reinforcing the value of what researchers were now calling canine medical detection. One evening, almost 6 months after Olivia's birth, Alexandra sat on her apartment balcony, watching the sunset Atlas resting contentedly at her feet. Her phone chimed with an incoming message from Catherine, a photo of Olivia sitting up independently, for the first time, her bright eyes and healthy appearance showing no signs of her premature arrival. The text that accompanied the image read, "Our miracle baby's latest milestone. According to the pediatrician, no developmental delays whatsoever. Dr. Chen is using Atlas's success story to secure funding for expanding the canine screening program to 5 more hospitals." Alexandra showed the phone screen to Atlas, who studied the image with what seemed like genuine interest. "You did that, buddy," she told him softly. "You saved her when no one else could have." Atlas nudged her hand gently before settling back into his relaxed position, perhaps understanding more than she knew, or perhaps simply responding to the emotion in her voice. Either way, the bond between them had deepened through this experience, a partnership strengthened by the absolute trust that had made all the difference when it mattered most. As darkness settled over the city, Alexandra reflected on how a single moment of listening to Atlas, instead of dismissing him, had changed so many lives. The K9 program had gained new respect and funding. Medical protocols were being rewritten to incorporate animal detection capabilities, and most importantly, a family that might have been shattered by tragedy was instead thriving. Some might call it coincidence or luck that brought them to the mall that day, but Alexandra knew better. It was the culmination of years of training, the refinement of Atlas's extraordinary abilities, and the willingness to trust an instinct that defied conventional wisdom. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and data, it had been the ancient bond between human and canine that had made the crucial difference, a reminder that sometimes the most sophisticated detection system is still the one that walks on 4 paws and sees the world through senses we can barely comprehend. And as Olivia Alexandra Winters grew into a healthy, joyful child under the watchful eyes of her devoted parents, she would forever be living proof that sometimes when conventional wisdom fails and technology reaches its limits, the extraordinary nose of a dedicated police dog can be the difference between tragedy and miracle. A silent guardian whose instincts transcend our understanding, but whose dedication to the truth saves lives in ways we're only beginning to understand.